Look, first of all, let me be very clear. I said at the time, January 6th was wrong. I called it an assault on law and order and an assault on our democratic processes. So full stop, it was wrong. Law enforcement will determine what happened there, and those who violated the law ought to be punished. I also, on January 6th, for the first time since I was the National Security Advisor on September 11th, I cried that day, right? Because I thought, I study countries that do this. Yes. I didn't think it would happen in my own country, so it was a terrible moment. I will say that that night, when they filed back into the Capitol after it was secured, and they certified that election, I had new faith in our institutions and the people who were protecting them. So we came through that as a country that ultimately upheld the law. Now, I think what Senator McConnell may be referencing is, yes, it's time to move on in a lot of ways. Yeah. I'm one who believes that the American people are now concerned about their what we call kitchen table issues, the price of gasoline, inflation, what's happening to their kids in school. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I will say that as somebody who was a national security expert, maybe didn't see in quite the same way the rise of China in ways that we're seeing it now. And so we do have a lot of issues. And I hope that what we will do is move on to the next generation of leadership.
I think it's really politically expedient for Mitch McConnell to say, let's move on, especially when the former twice impeached disgraced president enjoys attacking Mitch McConnell. But the problem is that past will become prologue if we don't find out exactly what happened January 6th.
And we will.
So it's not time now.
We will find out.
We must find out before moving on.
We will find out. But I'm going to tell you, I live in California, not Washington, D.C. And the American people do have other concerns that we ought to be thinking about and talking about.
Respectfully,
and
Madam
so,
Secretary, I think...
Well, let me finish now, Sunny, because as I said, I thought this would happen in countries I studied, not countries that I lived in. Our institutions have to be upheld. What happened on January 6th was wrong. I don't know how much more strongly I can say what happened on January 6th was wrong. I also know that as a government and as a country, we've got to be concerned about the things that are making life hard for Americans and hard for American families.
Condoleezza Rice wants to move on. She concedes that what happened on January 6th was wrong. It was, she told the host of The View last week, quote, an assault on law and order and an assault on our democratic processes, unquote. And Rice, a former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, thinks those who attacked and ransacked the U.S. Capitol should be punished. That day, she said, made her cry for the first time since September 11th. So yes, it was a terrible day. It was a stunning day. It was a day that defiled democracy. But it's time to move on, she said. Given Rice's gravitas and credibility, it was a stunning pronouncement, but perhaps we ought not be surprised. After all, Republicans have been urging the rest of us to move on from January 6th almost since January 7th. They refused to convict the former president for inciting the mob. They refused to authorize an independent bipartisan commission to investigate the insurrection. Some even questioned whether there was an insurrection to begin with. Now comes Rice, urging us to move on. No more investigating, no more discussion, no more grappling with the hard questions it raises. The mind seizes as it struggles to imagine anyone saying that about September 11th. That day is a livid scar upon American memory. The iconic buildings felled, the people caked in dust, the sudden sense of vulnerability, the candlelight vigils for those who were never coming home. September 11th spawned an independent bipartisan commission, joint House and Senate committee hearings, and 2 wars. We did not just move on. And yet, ghastly and frightening as they were, the events of that day posed no threat to our national existence. There was never a chance that a band of thugs ambitiously punching above their weight could topple American democracy. But that threat, however distant, was certainly in play on January 6th. What makes it worse is that the threat came from inside our own national house. Worse still, it's still there, just as virulent as it ever was. So it is jarring to hear Condoleezza Rice chirp about the need to move on to a better America. How exactly does that happen? How much must we ignore? How much must we forget? And why would they even ask it of us? The only answer that presents itself is that Republicans fear January 6th because it contains too many embarrassing truths. Those were not, after all, Democrats breaking the windows, beating the cops, erecting the gallows. No, those were Republicans, albeit Republicans of a stripe that would have been a stranger to Reagan, McCain, Eisenhower, or any other politician with even a molecule of statesmanship in them. Sadly, that's a quality in short supply in the GOP just now. Even in places where you'd expect to find it, i.e., a respected former government official, it turns out the cupboard is bare. But the capacity for political expedience, that they have in abundance. Move on, she says, to which the only patriotic reply is, no. Not until the questions are answered, the lessons learned, the nation secured, the culprits, those in the streets and those in the suites, held to account. The forces that animated the events of January 6th did not spring from nowhere, nor did they disappear into mist when the clock struck midnight. We face a clear and abiding danger, one we ignore at great peril. With all due respect to Rice, if we don't treat this with the seriousness it deserves, we won't have a better America to move on to. We'll be lucky to have an America at all.